Happy holidays. Let me get that out of the way. Okay. Yeah, happy holidays. I hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving and is gearing up for more holiday fun coming up soon. So sorry we can't be with you this holiday season and we can't have a big holiday party again with everyone. But you know, we want everyone to be safe, and we look forward to next year. You know, once all this, you know, COVID mess ends, being able to be with everyone again and hopefully have a good time in the new year. So, you know, this is the Robert Lunds Group, the Sierra Club. For those of you who are just joining us for the first time, we have about 1,400 members, you know, locally. We're Berkeley, Charleston, Colleton, Dorchester, and our mission is to explore, enjoy, and protect the planet. So we have a lot of volunteers, and let me get this out of the way so I can see my slide. So I'm the chair. My name is Christine von Kalnitz, and you were listening to Laura Moses, and she is our publicity chair. She opened the meeting, and I believe I saw Pat. She's in the house, and Star, and Julia, and Nina. They're all here. Yvonne is treasurer. Alec Cooley does our newsletter. Star is going to talk to you in a few minutes about outings. Let's see. Yeah, so we are really, again, so sorry that we haven't been able to have outings this year. We all miss it, truly, and I'm sure you do. I hope you're getting out on your own and having your own outings and your socially distanced outings. There's so much to do in the Low Country. You know, here's a few things you could do. I think Star is going to unmute himself and give us some more ideas and tips.
Christine, you have to stop screen sharing so Star can share.
Hey, Star, are you there?
I am.
Okay, do you have a slide to share?
How about that?
Excellent.
So one of the really great things to do for an outing for yourself, since we can't actually officially lead an outing, is to take the section of the Swamp Fox section of the Palmetto Trail. So basically it's a 5 or 6 mile hike that covers a little bit of lowland and some swampy areas and some nice longleaf pine forests. So it's a beautiful little 5 or 6 mile hike that gets you a wonderful taste of, in a minor day's hike, wonderful taste of the variety of the Francis Marion forest. And you basically start at the trailhead, which is right off Highway 17. It's actually sort of hard to find. You have to drive past it and then come back down going south to turn into it. A good place, this is where I usually start. You cross Steed Creek Road once, so you have to watch out there. There's a secondary parking spot in the middle if you wanted to use that, but you have to find this particular Forest Service road. Not hard, but you have to know where you're going. And so anyway, 5 or 6 miles, it's a nice morning's hike. Maybe a little bit more than a morning if you take it leisurely. And good time to have a lunch somewhere around in here. And then you come up to the Halfway Creek campground and collect your car. So you have to have, you know, plan ahead to have one of your persons leave a car here and one of your persons leave a car there so that you can work a shuttle there. There's a link here. It's in the trail, it's in the monthly newsletter as well. Another absolutely great place is the Donnelly Wildlife Management Area. This is in the other direction from Charleston, south on Highway 17. right around Highway 303 entrance. Anyway, you can enter the road. I think just about any time you can drive down to this first little parking area here and do a little bit of hike right there, and listen to the birds. It's a wonderful place toward evening to just get out of your car and listen for birds. This is a hunting area. That's what wildlife management area means. So there are times this is going to be closed because it's open for hunting. Now you cannot easily get there right now. So from now through February 9th, you have to look for when the hunts are. After February 9th, you'll be able to come down and go to this wonderful trail called the Boynton Trail. There's a absolutely amazing old dwelling there that's, well, straight out of Gone with the Wind. It's a falling down rickety old wood house. It's not a Georgian mansion by any means. You walk out here across Rice Dykes and come back to the parking area at the Boynton. You'll see eagles. You'll see hundreds, literally hundreds of crocodiles, particularly in the early spring. There may, depending on the water levels, there'll be amazing birds. This is one of the great places to go. And another great place to go is the Santi Coastal Reserve. Now, there will be an unofficial outing to the Santi Coastal Reserve sometime right around this date, February 9th. Now, you didn't hear that from me, so this isn't an official outing, but probably what we will do is hike a good section of this yellow trail, which is the Cape Trail, which is closed until February 9th. So soon after February 9th, we will go out there unofficially and take a little walk. Now, if you don't want to do that, you can always come to the entrance and drive in. And this is a significant birding area in South Carolina. And this drive-in is along kind of a little ridge. Longleaf pine forests. You can stop there if you see a tree with stripes on it and wait for the red cockaded woodpeckers to come in. It's better to do that in the evening. Again, this is a hunting area, so you can't walk around during the hunts. It's not advisable that you do that. But in the last 5 or 6 years, they've created these color-coded trails. And I've walked the purple and the blue, and I've ridden my bike on the red, and we've hiked the yellow regularly for the last 20 years, 30 years. And then they've added a new one, which is the green trail along the river, the Big Well Trail. When you go to the Big Well Trail, you drive right past the original Santee Gun Reserve hunting lodge. And you can just walk around that and think about the old white guys who used to go in there and drink whiskey and then go out and pretend to shoot ducks. But basically, we have this as it was deeded to the state of South Carolina through the Nature Conservancy and so on, because people like to shoot ducks. Before that, it was rice dykes and rice plantations and so forth. And well, it's a legacy we have from the period of slavery in our nation. Rice made a lot of white people wealthy. And one of the ways they did that was cultivate rice fields, and you'll be walking in them along the yellow trails here. So anyway, it's one of the great places in South Carolina to go looking at birds. And if you want to go, you can take any of these hiking or biking trails most of the time after February 9th. So we will contact me. We will have an unofficial outing to Santi Coastal Reserve. Sorry, that's it.
Excellent. Thank you, Star. That was great. I definitely love Santi Coastal Reserve. Everyone knows that. I might have to unofficially go there. All right. Let's see. Let me get this to work. Okay. So we need some volunteers. We need you to put on your mud boots and get on out here and help collect Spartina alterniflora seeds. So there is a federally funded grant that the National Department of Natural Resources has, and they'll be collecting seeds to plant basically the marsh grass that we see along the coast. And they need volunteers in December. The dates are coming up, the 10th, the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th. So plenty of opportunities to volunteer to get out there. You can do this as a socially distanced outdoor activity. We really want to encourage people to volunteer to do this because we know that our marshes are suffering, and they really need the help with planting of the seagrass. And in February, we normally have an oyster roast, and we're not going to be able to do that this year. So we really want to encourage people to get out there and celebrate the marsh, oysters, that type of life that we're all right now not being able to experience because of this virus. So it's also very important because of flooding. This planting the seagrass, the oyster bed restoration projects that DNR also conducts, all that is going to help the low country survive all this flooding, and the oyster beds and the seagrass, they slow down the wave action from these storms and reduce erosion. So this is a vital project for the low country. So if you can get out there and help, please do.
Are you sending this out, Christine, so we know how to register for it and stuff?
Sure. We can put it on our Facebook page. We can put it in our
Email,
newsletters.
for those of us not Facebook types. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sure. We can send some emails out. Yeah. It's definitely going to be in our newsletters. So, but I don't think we have another newsletter before then. So we'll try to send out a separate email or something.
So is this something people
Thank
could
you.
do? I've watched the motorboats destroy the marsh where I live this year.
Ugh.
Can I go somewhere and get seeds? And I mean, I watch the marsh, it's trying in this spot, but it's not doing well. Is this something people can do?
Right. I think that we need to talk with the DNR to find out exactly how to do it, and then where they think it's most appropriate to do it.
I think, Libby, I think
it's a scientific thing that they're doing.
I think the seed collection comes first, and then they plant.
Right.
Then at some point later on, we will have little seedlings, and then we go out and put those in the marsh. But right now the grasses have produced their seed heads, and that's what the collection is about first. And then once they get those, then they'll put them in a favorable nursery-like situation. And then we'll get little seedlings, and then we'll meet at another time and go put the little seedlings in places near your house, maybe.
Could we just do it on our own marsh? I mean, I got a bunch of marsh in front of me. James Island Creek.
Libby, I would go to
I think that's something you could ask them about.
Okay.
I think if once you knew exactly what you were doing in terms of collecting the seeds and then maybe propagating, then it probably, you could go do it yourself.
Cool. Well, I will be.
Yeah, I think if you could probably talk to DNR about maybe trying to set up a volunteer thing by your house.
Yeah. Very, very interesting.
I know that they have already chosen priority sites that they think are most in need. So I would take pictures, show them evidence of what you're talking about, and if your house or your marsh is not a priority site now, it could be in the future.
Merci.
All right. So next month, we will have a member slideshow, and we want to encourage anyone who has excellent photos of their outdoor activities to enjoy or to join. Right now, Nina is going to show pictures from a service trip to Big Bend. So that is a National Sierra Club service trip that she went out on, and we'll find out about that trip. Laura's going to show pictures from our oyster roast last year, so we can be nostalgic about oyster roast that we're not going to have this year. And then Julia is going to show some pictures of North Carolina. She spent a lot of time up there this year, and she'll be showing us the mountains up there. And Alec, myself, Bill, and Nina will likely show pictures like this one you're seeing right here. So this is a slot canyon in Utah. And we spent 3 weeks out in Utah in the Staircase Escalante area, Capitol Reef National Park, and Paria. What's that? It's not a national park, but it's a national area, national wildlife management area or something. So anyway, spent 3 weeks out there. We've got some fabulous photos. Utah is one of my favorite places on the earth. And if anyone else wants to show pictures of their adventures, please send me an email, get in touch with me somehow, and we'll set you up. All right, tonight, we're excited that Clint Calhoun is here. He's going to be talking about the Party Rock Fire. And what that is on Friday, November 11th, 2016, fire departments around North Carolina were called to help fight a wildfire in the western part of the state. Blaze had started 6 days earlier at Chimney Rock State Park and had grown to over 2,000 acres. It was threatening hundreds of structures in nearby communities. So Clint is going to tell us how the fire started, about its economic impact, the short-term ecological impacts, and the predicted long-term ecological impacts. Clint is a naturalist. He spent his entire career working in the Hickory Nut Gorge area of North Carolina, and we're very excited to welcome him tonight and hear this story about this incredibly large fire right in our backyard. So I will stop sharing my screen here and welcome Clint.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
I appreciate the invite to come and speak to you all. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm going to pull my screen up here so you guys can see what I'm looking at. Okay, so I hope everyone can see that.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, let me get this thing started. Okay, can everybody still see that? Or see, let me fix a setting here. Okay, there we go. So can everybody just see one screen?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, good. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about the Party Rock Fire. And as you can see in this introductory photo, you can see the flames on the ground. And as we were talking the other night, as I was just doing a quick run through, I took this photo before the fire was actually out. A friend of mine and I hiked up the mountain, and there were still places on the ground that were burning, and this little patch of leaves just happened to catch on fire while we were standing there, because the ground was still burning underneath. And so it was quite a tense moment, but nevertheless, we trudged on and tried to see what else we could discover on our little trip, and that's what we're going to be talking about.
Clint, Clint, can I interrupt you 1 minute?
Certainly.
I did want to let everyone know, if you have questions along the way, please put them in the chat. And after Clint is through, we will do a question and answer session. Thank you, Clint.
All right. So Party Rock is, its namesake comes from the fact that it basically is a large granite dome on the eastern end of Rumbling Bald Mountain. And it's called Party Rock because way back in the late 60s, early 70s, someone decided to paint party in large blue letters on the rock face. And thankfully, over the years, that has faded. And so there's only just a few remnants of paint still left up there. But if you know what you're looking for, when you're actually up on the mountain, you can actually see the writing. But Rumbling Bald is part of the larger Chimney Rock State Park. And it all became a state park in 2007. So there's not been a lot of time that's gone by since all that became a state park. But it's an area that's quite difficult to get to. There are a couple trails that will take you up to Party Rock, but none of them are easy, and there's really not a good way to get any kind of fire suppression equipment or anything like that. And that's partly what made this fire such a hard to deal with event. But anyway, the Party Rock fire began on November 5th, 2016, and it was finally 100% contained on November 29th, 2016. And that was thanks to a fairly substantial warm front that moved into the area and ended up dumping about 2.5 inches of rain. And it was much needed rain because the area had been in a drought for several months. And so it was, I think we were all very grateful for that rain. But this fire was the worst natural disaster to strike the Hickory Nut Gorge area in 100 years. The last large catastrophic event was the Great Flood of 1916, which really devastated a lot of Western North Carolina, including the city of Asheville, Hickory, Charlotte, several areas in the Catawba Basin, Gastonia. But Hickory Nut Gorge received a lot of damage during that year. And oddly enough, there was a documentary that came out on the Great Flood of 1916 that was being showcased in Hickory Nut Gorge at the time that the fire began. So there was plans to do this this big presentation for the communities of the gorge, and they ended up canceling that program because of the fire. The Forest Service invaded the Lake Lure Town Hall and set that up as their base of operations. So this celebration, whatever you want to call it, of the 1916 flood didn't happen because of the fire. But anyway, the total number of acres that was burned ended up being about 7,136 acres. And it was considered to be one of the most expensive fires in the country based on the number of resources that were expended over that period of time. There were fire departments from 24 different states in the nation, including Oregon, Washington, and Alaska. So it was quite an extensive event, and we saw a lot of different firefighting tactics that were brought in, and so different types of experiences that and collaboration amongst these different agencies. It was really quite unique. So here's some pictures. I took these photos on, it was November 10th, the day before it decided to start moving really quickly and actually began to put homes in significant danger. But at this time, the fire was burning on the southern face of Rumbling Bald and also on the northern side of Rumbling Bald, and getting ready to make its advance west, which was where things really started to become a problem. The great thing about this fire, and it's certainly always the thing that we celebrate in these types of events, is there were no human lives lost and no structures lost. There were no serious injuries, and that's always the biggest concern with an event of this size. The economic impact to the area was severe, but it was a short run type of experience, so it wasn't something that totally devastated the area for a long time, and it's not something that the community is still feeling the effects from. And the environmental impact from the fire was generally positive. In the short term, there was quite a bit of air quality impacts due to all the smoke. We dealt with a temperature inversion that lasted. You would usually, start out in the mornings and make everything really, really smoky, and you'd have smoke for miles. But then in the afternoon, the temperature inversion would lift and the smoke would kind of move out. But they ended up having to close schools in the area for about 3 weeks, so almost the whole duration of the fire. There was no school taking place in those local schools because of the smoke. So one of the things that we know and appreciate as naturalists is that fire is a natural dynamic in the American landscape. And we know, based on history and archaeological information and as well as geological and biological information that we get from trees and soil and things like that, that prior to European settlement, Native Americans were using fire as a landscape management tool. They probably didn't realize, from a scientific standpoint, the value of it, but from a common sense standpoint, they understood that what they were doing was beneficial. And we believe that fire was part of the landscape all the way into the 1800s. And around that time, it started to become more dangerous because more and more people were settling the area. And obviously, fire and homes don't go well together. And this trend continued so that by the mid-20th century, fire was heavily suppressed, and you had ad campaigns that were putting woodland fires in a negative light. So Smokey the Bear showed up and said, "Only you can prevent forest fires." And if you'll notice now in Forest Service's ads that involve Smokey the Bear, he says, "Only you can prevent wildfires." So they've changed their strategy as far as that goes. And fire suppression and unsustainable forestry practices have also caused changes in our southern Appalachian forest. There's been a lot of things that have happened in the forest of the southern Appalachians. They've dealt with everything from chestnut blight to introductions of invasive species. And so those things, in conjunction with changing the natural dynamics of the forest, have impacted a lot of things and affected the biodiversity of the forest, and in general has had a negative impact. So with decreased fire frequency, there is a decrease in fire tolerant species and an increase in fire intolerant species. And when the program night opened up, I saw that talking about longleaf pines, and longleaf pine is an example of a species that is fire tolerant And in the Southern Appalachians, where fire is not as well studied as it is in the eastern part of North Carolina and in areas where there's longleaf pine and other fire-dependent species, in the Southern Appalachians, it's not as well studied, but we know that there are species that do depend on fire for seed germination and so forth. And so one of the things that we've noticed is this decrease in those fire-tolerant species due to a lack of fire. And this has also led to an increase in densities of tulip poplar and red maple. And this is in unnatural numbers because we have so much second and third growth forest. We wouldn't see these kind of densities in old growth forest. But some of the fire tolerant species, such as oaks, hickories, and certain species of pine, they're finding it harder to survive in this new forest regime because of competition. There are so many stems of these faster growing species that they really outcompete the oaks and hickories. And if we change that dynamic by introducing fire into the landscape, we would actually free up the canopy and allow these oaks and hickories to be able to flourish. So the Party Rock Fire, while really larger than it should have been, was a much needed reset button. And it was kind of odd at the time, which a lot of it just goes to a lack of education. But the reports that we were hearing as this was getting so much news coverage was, oh, this is going to be so devastating and so catastrophic and so terrible, because everybody thinks of the Hickory Nut Gorge area as this beautiful, wonderful natural area, and it is, but they almost look at it as a maybe a utopia or some type of spiritual area. And I guess if that's the way you roll, then certainly you can think of it that way. But some people don't always understand that nature takes no prisoners, and that nature is not always the friendly environment that it's made out to be in media. Nature is about give and take, and it's about loss, and it's about renewal. And so these are should be the things that we take away from this type of event. And the Party Rock Fire certainly reset some things and gave us some things that we were missing in that forest on that mountain. It removed significant amounts of litter and fuel, which would lead to catastrophic fires. At the same time, it has contributed new levels of litter and fuel, which is going to be something that land managers will have to deal with over the next few years. It provided a mechanism for reducing stem densities of these fire-intolerant species, and at the same time, improving habitat for fire-tolerant species. So that was certainly a benefit. One of the greatest benefits of the fire is that it creates gaps in the canopy and on the forest floor that help to improve biodiversity. So by removing shade of some of these larger canopy species that really needed to be taken out anyway, it opens the forest floor and allows for species that have possibly not been present in the ecosystem for some time. All of a sudden now they can recolonize the area and exist for a little while longer. So here's some pictures that were taken within a few weeks of the fire. Some of these were on the top of the mountain, some were on the bottom of the mountain, but you can see that in a lot of these places, it was pretty much a clean sweep along the forest floor. All of the leaf litter was burnt off. The tree that you see there, that was a large hickory tree that was hollow in the middle, and it was basically burned and fell. And one of the things that fire does is it takes a lot of that carbon that has been stored in large timber and puts it back into the environment. Trees are big carbon sinks. So they're storing carbon, and they can store carbon for a really long time. And carbon is a very important part of the natural cycle of things. And so by having some of these larger trees that have been standing for a long time, to have them burned and removed and to recycle that carbon was really a good thing. Oops. Okay, so this is Party Rock. Okay, this is where the fire started, and I don't know fully all of the details, but there were some teenagers that were up on the mountain, and for whatever reason, one of them decided to light a fire up there. And to understand the forest dynamic on Party Rock, it's mostly a treeless area until you get further up on top of the dome. And everything else is these little soil mats that are mostly composed of twisted hair, spike moss, grasses, and several other small plants. But in this particular situation, these soil mats were so dry and the vegetation was so dry, as soon as the first spark hit them, they ignited. And all it took was a few sparks blowing across the rock face to another soil mat, and it just ended up catching everything on fire. And at first, the fire was burning to the east, and there were things that rolled off the dome down below the cliffs, and so, but everything was burning to the east. And for the first couple of days, it looked like the Forest Service was going to be able to get a handle on it. But then the wind picked up, and it split the fire, and it started going in multiple directions. And so that was when they knew that they had some trouble on their hands. And that was when they started looking to get support from other agencies. The fire behavior was exacerbated by low fuel moisture levels and drought conditions. We had very low humidity. The fire mostly burned along the surface of the ground, which is always a good thing because that means that it's not burning up in the trees. There were areas of the mountain, particularly where slopes were steep and up on the ridge tops, where temperatures got really hot. And this is where the majority of the vegetative damage occurred. So this was where we had a lot of trees that were impacted. We had some crown fire in some areas. So those are the places where most of the damage occurred. And the fire also, this was what was really remarkable to me, because this fire is not something that we see a lot of in our area. And this was really the only major fire that I can remember in my 47 years of existence, at least as far as anything of this magnitude. But what really amazed me was the pattern of burning. It was really kind of like a mosaic. You'd have areas where you'd have the ground would hardly be scorched, and then you'd have an area that had maybe some medium intensity, and then areas where they were just everything was cooked. So you had this varying patchwork-like appearance on the ground, and it was really interesting. And it all had to do with how much fuel was available in that area and the type of ecological community that was associated. So if there were areas of rhododendron and mountain laurel, a lot of those areas burn really, really hot because of the waxy leaves and volatile oils that are associated with many of those types of plants. And then remarkably, there were some areas that didn't even burn at all. Like some of the Rich Cove areas, they were scarcely impacted. So it's really interesting. And here's some more pictures of some of the areas. Oddly enough, the picture that you see at the upper right there, this is along road that goes across the ridge, and the fire burned right up to the road, and it stopped. And as we walked through this, we found it to be rather interesting. And I talked to one of the biologists who worked that fire and was telling him about it. And he said probably what was happening in this location was the fire was moving so fast that as the fire came together, everything was kind of arching over top of the road, and just nothing burned there just because of the way the flames were moving. And I just found that to be very fascinating. But if you look at the pictures on the lower part, the upper part, very little damage. The lower part, those lower pictures, quite a bit of damage. This was a really hot area on the mountain. It burned pretty much all the shrub layer, damaged a lot of trees. It actually got up into the canopy in places. And then that one there on the lower right, that was just really a total cooking of everything. It exposed the soil, and it actually degraded the soil due to the heat. It removed a lot of the organic matter that was in the soil. So really, really interesting how that fire changed the dynamics up there. This picture was taken in the spring following the fire, and you can still see some of the scars that were left over from the spring. So those blackened areas are areas where the trees were completely killed. There was no leaf out in those areas. You can see rocky areas that were completely exposed due to the fire, the burning of the soil and organic material that been caught up in those rocky places. And so it left these little areas that are kind of halo shaped on the mountain. And some of this has regenerated, so it's not quite as obvious. If you were to go up there now, you wouldn't see a lot of this because the regeneration has been quite rapid. But this is what it looked like immediately the few months following the fire. So how do such fires impact the natural communities? In general, they typically improve biodiversity. They increase the amount of light reaching the forest floor. They remove competition, and they are selective for fire-tolerant species. So if you're able to survive a hot fire, then that's good for you because that gives you the opportunity to set seed and be able to continue your species. These types of fires also can do significant damage to trees and shrubs if the temperatures get too high. And this is why we did have some tree mortality in the area. An extremely hot fire can also destroy the organic components of the soil as well as burn the roots of trees and shrubs. And this was evident in what we saw up there. It can also create erosion problems, but this is generally not as bad as a problem as most people would think. Most of the erosion problems, believe it or not, are not from in the areas where the fire burned, but rather where the Forest Service went through and cut in fire lines. Fire lines, if they're not restored, can create massive erosion problems. So that can be an issue after a fire event such as this. One of the things that certainly made us nervous and has been confirmed since the fire is the increase in the number of invasive species, particularly species such as princess tree. That's been a major problem. We've seen an increase in Oriental bittersweet, as well as a few other fire tolerant species. Wildlife species generally fare pretty well. There was a lot of people who were worried about what was happening to all the wildlife on the mountain as the fire was burning. And it's hard to get people to understand that, wildlife generally doesn't run away from fire. It's not like Bambi on a Disney movie, but rather you see animals just kind of nonchalantly moving around in the forest. They either stay ahead of the fire or they'll walk around the fire. We saw deer moving into the area immediately after the fire. We saw predator species such as owls that were out during the daytime, and they would stay in advance of the fire. They would actually hang out in the trees in the smoke and would see movement down on the forest floor and would actually fly down and get rodents and things like that. So they actually used it to their advantage, as did some of the other larger predator species. So it's really interesting how it creates that kind of dynamic. The animals that it was hardest on would have been slow-moving species. There's salamanders, turtles, and invertebrates. And we did see quite a lot of lost box turtles that had burrowed down into the leaf litter. And so there were a lot of those that didn't make it. But in general, the larger species really benefited quite well in the short run. So the question is what's next? And this presentation, I should have updated a little bit. If you're standing at a distance from the mountain, you wouldn't know that a fire even went through the area. It just doesn't look impacted at all. So you actually have to get boots on the ground and actually be on the mountain to be able to see the effects of the fire and how the forest has responded to the fire. There's been quite a bit of tree mortality, particularly in the hot areas, and that was expected. But one of the things we have not seen is total canopy loss, no mass devastation like what a lot of people thought there would be. Which those of us who are familiar with fire dynamics, we knew there wouldn't be major canopy loss. We knew that there would be mortality, but we expected it to be in pockets. So we're really seeing a lot of the things that we expected to see with the outcome of this fire. There's usually always an increased diversity of herbaceous species, increased numbers of wildflowers, and this will occur over the next few years. This past summer, I took a trip up there, actually spring. I went back up on the mountain and walked the entire ridge and was absolutely blown away by some of the things that I saw. Several species that are considered to be rare in Hickory Nut Gorge were proliferating everywhere. One is a federally endangered species called white iriset, and I was seeing the highest numbers up there that I've ever seen. Patches of wild bleeding heart were blooming around the outcroppings. Yellow honeysuckle, which is a rare species, was everywhere. And I'd never seen as much up there as I did. So it was really beneficial for the herbaceous species. And it's amazing, but recovery was almost immediate in most of the places up on the mountain. With the fire burning in November, by spring, there were already signs of regeneration, and it was amazing. Now, admittedly, some of these areas are going to take a little longer to regenerate because of the amount of damage that was done to the canopy as well as to the forest floor itself, but it will still come back at some point. And these are some of the things that I saw in the spring following the fire. You can see the herbaceous growth starting to come up there on the forest floor. The salamander there, that's a mud salamander. Found it just hanging out in the rocks, so it fared through the fire. You can see some of the devastation there lower down. That area is still quite devoid of vegetation. And then the green thing that you see coming up there, that is white iriset, which is the federally endangered species that I was talking about a second ago. This is just more vegetation that's coming up. We had trilliums that were popping up down below here. This is a showy orchis. There were quite a few of those blooming when I did my walkthrough. So overall, I've been really, really pleased with what has shown up after the fire. This is another little area. The white flower that you see there is called shooting star, and it's a rare species found in Hickernut Gorge that generally likes sort of wet areas and usually grows near mafic rocks. And so there's quite a bit of that growing in there. And the photo there on the upper left, all of that green growth that you see there is new shooting star plants. And there was never that many there on that site before the fire. And then there's dwarf crested iris down on the bottom. And this is what Party Rock looked like after the fire in the spring of 2017. So you can see the little purple flowers that are growing there. And this is all things that basically showed up just right after the fire. So really quite remarkable how quickly things colonized those soil mats after the fire. And this was on the northern side of Rumbling Bald, over where the Cove, Rich Cove forests are. They really had the least amount of damage over there. So it really didn't impact the forest floor much over there, because you had all the ferns and spring ephemerals that were blooming over there. There's a lot of Dutchman's breeches, which is the thing that's there on the bottom, on the lower left corner, and then Vassie's trillium is the trillium there on the lower right. So cool stuff. Only time will tell what the full long-term prognosis for these forests will be. The question that we ask is, will fire continue to be withheld from the landscape? That's a big question that we have, and from a management standpoint, how will the state park be able to implement fire as part of managing this area of the state park? Right now, there's a lot of doubt as to whether or not that can be actually done, because the terrain is just not conducive to fighting a large scale fire. That was one of the things that they really found out as they tried to deal with it. So doing a controlled or prescribed burn on the mountain is really something that would take a lot of preparation and logistical analysis to be able to do and do well. Some other questions is, what lessons have we learned from the fire that we can use when the next one occurs? We've tried to encourage the communities of Chimney Rock and Lake Lure to be fire wise. So looking at how they, looking at how trees are allowed to grow close to houses, and eliminating certain types of shrubs from yards and things like that, and just being more conscious of the possibility that fire could occur again. We were lucky in that we didn't lose any homes or anything like that. It could have gone badly pretty quickly if things had, if there hadn't been some preparation and we hadn't had the fire support that we were able to get. Things may not have gone quite as well as they did. All right, if you'd like to see what things look like now, I throw this little plug in there. You can go to my YouTube channel and check out my virtual field trip videos. These are the URLs that you see here, and I don't know how quickly you can write, but all you have to do is go on YouTube. You can probably type in my name and it'll probably give you my YouTube channel. my profession is I'm a high school science teacher. And so with COVID, I've had to get really creative in how I do a lot of my classes and lessons and things. And so I've been doing a lot of virtual field trips and virtual labs and things like that for my classes. And so one of the virtual field trips that I did was to go back up on the mountain and record some of the things, some of the recent outcomes of the fire. So you're certainly invited to go and check out those videos, and it will show you some of the things that are happening up on the mountain as it is right now. So with that, I guess I would ask if there are any questions.
Excellent. Excellent presentation. That was so great. I know if I'm ever in the woods and I see a trillium, I just think it's a special day.
Always.
You know, I don't see them that often. So they are special to me. And the Dutchman's breeches, I could totally see a Dutchman's breeches there. That was really fascinating to see that plant. And I'm really, really excited that all those endangered species like the shooting star are coming back. That's really great to hear. Yeah. So let me get to some of these questions here. All right. When is the best season for wildflowers?
Spring.
Yeah.
Always spring. We usually start seeing wildflowers showing up. Actually, I should say late winter. Because as early as late February, we can have things starting to come up because of the orientation of the gorge, in that it runs east to west. That gives us north-facing exposures and south-facing exposures. So the things that are on the south-facing slopes bloom earlier than everything else. So we can see trillium, we can see columbine, we can see phacelia that starts to bloom, even bloodroot and things like that, as late as or as early as late February, early March. And then that shifts over to the north side. You start seeing things blooming over there, usually around mid-March. So it's in that spring ephemeral season actually will go from late February until about mid-May. And then start to kind of get a lull as things get ready to gear up for the summer. But it's one of the most beautiful places in North Carolina when it comes to wildflowers.
Well, from the pictures you showed, I believe you. So how about those soil mats on Party Rock? You showed that those purple flowers were coming back, but are those part of the original soil mat? What's going on there?
So I don't remember ever seeing those there, but that particular plant is a successional plant. So it's not anything that I would not expect to show up. We see that particular species, it's called toad flax, but we see that species a lot of times in waste areas, meadows, drainages, things like that. So it's not a plant that we would not have expected to show up there. And now you can hardly even find that plant because it has been replaced by all the other forbs that we would expect to see up there. A lot more grasses are growing up on the mountain. So a lot of those successional plants are being replaced by new successional plants.
Okay. So are there studies of fire impacts on the fungi in the area of the fire?
Not that I'm aware. As far as I'm aware, I'm the only person doing any work up there as far as doing any kind of documentation. And so, which I really hate. I really wish that someone had taken the opportunity to do more documentation beyond what I've done. Because to me, there was so much that could have been learned from this fire, based on the regeneration that has occurred and so forth. I'm not a fungi person myself. I'm more of a plants person and a herb person. And so my knowledge of fungi is severely limited. But there were some definite missed opportunities. And had I been in graduate school, it would have been a perfect graduate project to have worked on, and where I could have spent a lot of time up on the mountain. But as it is right now with my school schedule, I have to just basically get up there anytime I can. And I always try to at least photo document what I see when I go up there.
So the Forest Service or any sort of other park service or nobody is doing any kind of
Nobody.
studies at all.
Just
Wow.
me. And part of it has to
So-
do with a lot of it has to do with this lack of resources. The state park would love to be able to have someone to be able to spend time up there and document it, but they just do not have the people to be able to do that kind of study. So they rely on me. I have a good relationship with them just because of the work I've done up there for so many years. So they usually, if they have a question, they call me.
Great. But they're glad you're around. So was the American chestnut fire resistant?
I don't know. Obviously those trees kind of fell out well before I was born. So I really don't know. I would expect, just based on the size of the American chestnut and the thickness of its bark and so forth, I would imagine that it would have probably done pretty well. It's similar to oaks and hickories in that it would have been a climax species, and so it would have probably done fairly well in how it would have responded. Fire is such a funny thing in the way that it moves through the forest, and where chestnut would have been found, which would have been more so in some of the rich cove forests and places like that. Fire is not as prevalent or prone in that particular community. It's just not a community where fire does well because of the moisture regime in that type of forest. It just tends to be wetter, a greater amount of soil moisture, and so it just doesn't burn as well as some of the ridge areas, places where you have heath and those kinds of things.
Okay. So you mentioned it about the prescribed burning and that it would be difficult to do that. And it sounds like it's a state issue, whether or not they would do that or not.
Yeah, it really is.
Is anyone coming? Yeah.
It has to do with the state and Forest Service being able to coordinate that kind of thing. And up there, I mean, there's certain parts where certainly you could do some controlled burning, but a lot of it is limited by topography. Up there, it goes from flat to steep real quick because you're right on the Blue Ridge Escarpment, and so with the elevation changes, I mean, you're going from 1,000 feet to 2,000 feet very quickly with the steepness of the terrain. And so the terrain is really the limiting factor and what makes it so difficult to be able to do that. If they were to do a prescribed fire, they'd have to do it in small chunks, and that becomes really difficult as far as cost. It's just really not worth the time to burn small patches when you really need to burn larger areas. So it's not like doing a burn down in the eastern part of the state where you have wide open areas and you can really go through and effectively control and manage a fire.
Well, is there no one else in the whole Blue Ridge doing prescribed burns?
They are. They do some prescribed burns in Linville Gorge, which is not too far from where we're at. but that's Pisgah National Forest where they're doing that, and they're able to do some things over there that we're not able to do in Hickory Nut Gorge, because we also have that little problem of having to deal with people because we've got homes and things like that, and that creates some additional issues in Linville Gorge because that's part of the National Forest, and the Linville Gorge wilderness area and all that kind of thing. You're not dealing with so many houses around, and it's a different dynamic there than what we have in here.
Well, that does lead me to another question, is the land management issue. Is anyone suggesting that you'll manage the land differently and not allow more property development?
Well, I mean, certainly people are going to develop the property any way they want to, but that has been one of the things that we've tried to do since the fire, is to encourage people to be fire wise, to think about the kinds of things that they do in their yard, to think about the kinds of things that they plant, how they dispose of leaf litter, how close they let trees and shrubs grow to their houses, and things like that, and try to encourage people to think about those kinds of things so they're not encouraging fire in their yards and putting their homes at risk.
It does seem like a perpetual problem across the whole country, is people putting their houses literally knowingly in harm's way, and then having to be bailed out by either the federal government or some insurance company or something. So it really is a national issue.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So I think there's some more questions here. How will global warming change the ecosystem of Western North Carolina? Do you think there'll be more fires or rapid ecosystem change?
That's a great question. And that's one that we have talked about. We actually did a roundtable discussion in the spring after the Party Rock fire. And that was one of the questions that we definitely discussed, was how is climate change going to impact fire frequency? And we believe, based on what we see from climatological data, where it's suggesting change, where you're getting these extremes. So you get extreme drought followed by extreme rainfall events and things like that. And there's nothing that's just, there's nothing that's even. So we believe that there will be increased fire frequency, probably, and especially in some of these areas that are meant to burn. And how that's going to change the ecosystem, we don't really know. There's a lot of things, because fire has been withheld from the landscape for so long. There are a lot of species that have begun to adapt to a lifestyle of not having fire, and thus are losing some of their resiliency as far as fire is concerned. So that is something that we are interested in knowing more about, and what kind of ecological impact that is going to have on these natural communities, because we really don't know, and that's the tough part to deal with when it comes to climate change. There are just things that we don't know what those ecological impacts will be. I mean, already we can see how things are changing with certain ecosystems as far as loss of species due to changes in weather patterns and things like that. There's a lichen that's found in Hickory Nut Gorge. It's a federally endangered species, and it requires high humidity. It requires a fair amount of rainfall. It requires living in a somewhat wet environment. And drought has already severely impacted that species. And it's the place where it grows is the only place in the entire Hickory Nut Gorge area where you can find it. It's found in some other places in North Carolina, but as far as Hickory Nut Gorge is concerned, this one location is the only place that it's found. And so any kind of damage that occurs with that ecosystem is going to impact that species.
Right. I think we're all dealing with it. Again,
Yeah.
that's an international
Especially
issue.
those of you who live down at the coast.
I tell you, with all this flooding. So someone had made the comment that it sounds like there needs to be outreach to local colleges to get them interested, to get them out there.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with priorities, you know, and what professors are interested in doing what and that kind of thing. There's just, for whatever reason, there just has not been as much interest in the Hickory Nut Gorge area over the last few years, other than as for conservation. I mean, there's certainly a lot going on with conservation. The land conservancies have been really hard at work trying to purchase more land. They're trying to create more recreational opportunities and things like that. But what's kind of being pushed to the side is there is less work being done from the natural resource aspect as far as inventory and those kinds of things, which is a little bit alarming to me, because while I love recreation and I'm a big fan, recreation at the expense of natural resources to me can get a little bit sticky. So that's certainly one of the areas where I get a little concerned.
Right. There's another question here. Has the U.S. Forest Service repaired the plow lanes from potential erosion damage?
They did some work. They didn't do as good a job as I thought that they should have, but they did go in and do some repair work. The town of Lake Lure has property that they turned into a park, and there were two major fire lines that were put in on their property. And the Forest Service was supposed to go in and fix all those. And one of the conservancy groups has conservation easements on that property. And they went after the town of Lake Lure for the erosion issues that were on those conservation easements, because it was Clean Water Management Trust Fund easements. And it was not even the town of Lake Lure's fault that those lines were there. They had been put in by the Forest Service, so we had to get the Forest Service to come out and fix them. And then somebody from the conservancy group had to come out and verify that the problems had been fixed. And it was just really kind of a nightmare scene. And but it's just one of those things that happens. But yeah, there were quite a few issues that they could have done a better job of repairing after the fact.
Unintended consequences.
Right.
Yeah, those things happen. Hey, Star, do you want to unmute yourself and tell us about this link you put on there? Earth Engine.
Well, I don't have a whole lot of information. I was just tinkering around with it. So I looked up rumbling bald on this Google Earth, and it's sort of a time lapse. And I'm having trouble centering with where I want to look at. And what I wanted to see was that this is what the people with satellite access do all the time, is look and see what happened differently after something or another. And I was just tinkering around trying to see if I could find rumbling bald, and I haven't really been able to find. I find Lake Lure, and I don't know if I can zoom in more or less with this or not. But I was wondering whether I could see the fire, and I wasn't quite looking for smoke exactly, but I was looking for charred areas or something. And right now it's not quite zoomed in enough. So I just found.
Okay, well, I've never even heard of it.
So you can look at glaciers recede and things like that, mining effects and so on. So I wondered if this would be visible, and I'm not sure it is or isn't. The area is, and it goes from 1980 something to 2017, I think.
Well, that sounds like a neat resource.
Yeah, I don't know if they're the right seasons and so forth. And among other things, I realized that this is a whole lot more complicated geologically than I had any idea about. It's a lot more wrinkledy and not particularly patterny. as what I was expecting. So that's all I had to say.
Well, it sounds like a site you could spend a good bit of time on. Like, you know. So Julia, you had written something in the chat, and I think it got cut off. Do you want to unmute yourself and tell us what you were thinking?
Yeah, I guess I hit a return. Yeah, when the fire started, it was like 35 acres, and I don't remember who was giving the updates, whether it was a Forest Service update, but every day I would go on that website and see how much had burned. What was that, Clint? Was that the Forest Service?
That was the Forest Service that was given. Once they took command of the fire, they would give regular updates, and they pretty much did that all the way until the fire concluded.
Yeah, well, we're kind of your neighbors. We have a second home on the other side of the lake from the fire, and
Okay.
so we were watching it with great interest. You know, at first it was
I'm sure.
7 acres, and we went, "Oh, that's interesting," and then it was 35, and then it was 500.
Mhm.
It really jumped in a hurry, and
It did.
we didn't go up there because of the smoke. We said it was a good time to stay away, and really appreciate hearing your perspective on it, because I was kind of expecting to come back and it would be like graveyard fields.
Right.
And why is it that fire was so bad at graveyard fields that it still isn't forested?
It's a different environment. It's just really a totally different type of forest, and that has a lot to do with it. That up there at Graveyard Fields, I'm not as familiar with all of the ecological dynamics that occur in spruce fir forest, which is what was formerly at Graveyard Fields. So it's a little harder for me to speak on those impacts. And that fire happened a long time ago. But my guess is that it burned so hot that it did exactly what occurred in places at Rumbling Bald, where it sterilized the soil. And because of the environment up there, it being, cold, damp a lot of the time, there's probably some mineral leaching that occurs, and it just doesn't allow things to really grow as well as they would in an area that's a little bit less prone to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just delighted to see the trees came back.
Yeah.
Julia, I have a question for you.
Yes.
So since you have a home up there, are you managing the land around your home differently because of fires?
There's one thing that we bought a house that had already been built in a kind of developed area. There's a lot of most of the lots are, say, a half acre, and a large percentage of them nobody's built on yet. So there's a lot of woods around us. But I decided I did not need a gas fireplace if it meant putting a propane tank in the yard. But as far as, cutting back trees and, around the house, not particularly. It's not landscaped. I don't have a lawn. But I do get out and pay a lot of attention to the trees. And I'm very fond of red maples and yellow poplars. They're beautiful in the fall, but there are a lot of them in this location. And Clint, I'll talk to you later about hemlocks. I think I've identified some hemlocks, and I didn't think they would be at this elevation. But it's been interesting. We've stayed up here during the pandemic, and I've watched the seasons change, and it's so very different from Charleston, where we go from maybe winter time to summer in about 2 weeks.
Right.
It's like azaleas and bam, summertime.
Or from summer to 33 degrees.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't last long. I'm gonna mute myself, but thank you so much for coming, Clint. This is,
Sure.
I hope we'll run into each other when we can actually be personable.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So I don't think we have any more questions in the chat. And Clint, I just want to thank you so much. This has been a fascinating tour of the Party Rock Fire, and I'm glad to hear all the positive that's happening. And we'll worry a little bit about that ground that's not coming back yet, but I think there's hope still from what you're saying.
I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah. So that's, thank you again. Thank you to everyone who came tonight and asked questions. They're great questions, everybody. And just take care of yourselves this holiday season, and follow all the guidelines, and let's hopefully see your shining faces again very soon.
Thank you very much for a great program.
Thank you.
Go.
Yay.
Mhm.